Hotel.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
All
salam.
right. Well, I'm glad to see you up this morning. Has everybody had some sugar? All right. Cool. We're going to get started. And Reverend Jerry McAfee, who was supposed to be here, had a death in the family and had to cancel. But that's all right because we are privileged to have, anyway, Brother Joe, welcome to DC. Hold on, I can tell you a little bit about him, but I should really be breathing. I'm Maria Baxter. I'm the Director of African American Affairs here at Mankato State University. Brother Joe, as he's affectionately called, is from Oxford. He is an ordained minister, musician, fantastic poet, community activist, and a phenomenal speaker. He has been a 19-year associate of the Pan-Afrikan Student Leadership Conference, meaning that he's been here almost as long as the conference has. He's been a speaker, a presenter, a workshop facilitator, and he's been on the planning committee. He currently serves as director of the Pan-Afrikan Student Services at Oxford College. Brother Joe is an Oxford graduate. He is, his name, in DC means preacher or teacher, which he does all the time. And he's a great, I didn't know you were a graduate of St. Paul Central. Fantastic. I'm a graduate of St. Paul Central. I was there much earlier than he was, though. Not too much earlier. Maybe a couple of years. Brother Joe has presented in community agencies, churches, high schools, colleges, seminars, and conferences. His informational style of presentation is both intimate and motivational. Brother Joe is unashamedly Christian and unapologetically Pan-African. And he refers to himself as a servant, which he definitely is. If you need somebody, those of you, how many of you are from Osborne here?
Right on.
Okay, well then you already know how dedicated he is to you. All you have to do is ask. I've never seen a man more unselfish than Joe. His motto is seek the truth and speak the truth, to encourage others to do the same. With that, I'm going to ask Brother Joe to come on up here, and he will speak the truth, and hopefully you will be able to do the same.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I want to make sure that everybody's alive and well and healthy and active and full of spirit and encouraged and blessed. Some of you, how many of you were expecting Rev Magazine? Gary's a friend of mine, mentor of mine, big brother, and I feel privileged just to be able to step in, pinch hit, so to speak, because Jerry always brings something that is powerful and enlightening. One of the things I learned a long time ago, that whenever I'm in the place of someone else, the only person I can be is myself. So what you're going to get is not Jerry McAfee. And I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to be who I am and share with you what I have to give you this morning. What I would like to share with you in the next several moments is a couple of thoughts. One, in fact, excuse me just a second, I wanted to get my Bible and share with you two scriptures, one from the Old Testament, and specifically Hosea 4:6. How many of you read your Bible? All right. Specifically Hosea 4:6, and It reads this way. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you from being priest for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. The second scripture comes out of the New Testament in 2 Timothy. And in chapter 3, verse 16. All scripture is given by the inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, fully equipped for every good work. I want to give you a thought to think about today. Hopefully it'll stick with you a little bit. And that thought is how to overcome or how to be transformed from the spirit of the nigger. When I was growing up, and this was 20, 30 years ago, when a brother would say or refer to me as nigger, I embraced him. When a white kid would refer to me as nigger, I would punch him in his mouth. Sound familiar? So obviously not much has changed. And I did some looking and some working and some digging into what this was all about. Because how can I respond with affection on one hand and with violence on the other for being referred to as the same thing? So if someone said, Brother Joe, and they were black, and I said, how you doing? And I'd share some love. But if one of my white students would say, Brother Joe, and I punched him in the mouth, something to me doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem to be equal. It doesn't seem to say the same thing. The only reason that I respond differently when I hear this word nigger is because I have been conditioned to embrace, within the context of my own cultural group, a name that was given to me about all of us that refers to the very wretchedness that is stereotyped upon us coming from those from the outside. And so my offense, or when I just want to retaliate when someone who doesn't have enough melanin or the same amount of melanin in their skin that I do, referring to me as a nigger, doesn't seem to be the same thing. And over the years, we've used this word. In fact, I think it's one of the most abused words among African people. Because it relates to nothing that's positive about you. And it's important for you to understand that. But what's more important is to understand how you got to the place of embracing something that describes the worst of you. How you got to the point where you embrace the title, you embrace the designated name of something that describes all the stereotypes that you try to play down. Well, you have to begin by recognizing, particularly as African American people, when you were brought here, who you were before was eliminated. If you were Fulani before, you were no longer Fulani. If you were Mandinka, or Ashanti, or Tree, or Ga, or Wolof, or Hausa, or Igbo, or Yoruba, you were no longer any of those things. You no longer could speak the languages that you spoke. You no longer could practice the beliefs that you had, the customs that you had. You could no longer do those things. And in the process of the creation of this spirit, and I call it a spirit because it infects the soul of humanity. And it perpetrates itself as something that's real to those who have embraced it. It's important to first of all recognize when you're talking about spirit, you're talking about things that have nothing to do with a human being. You're talking about something that has a state of being that's beyond the mortal that we are. A spirit is immortal, and it exists just to be or do whatever it is. So when we're talking about the spirit of the nigger, we're talking about that thing that exists to destroy your very soul. And every time you embrace the things that are of the spirit of the nigger, you begin to embrace the things that are meant to destroy who you are from the inside out. And it doesn't matter what you do to the outside. If you don't change what's on the inside, it'll still be there. I want you to understand, a long time ago, when we began to embrace this spirit, we began to do things that began to designate our role in society. We've said several times at this conference so far that when you see black folks who are of high post in the African American community, they are either entertainers or athletes. You don't see the scientists and the medical doctors, high post. You don't see the business owners and the educators, high post. But the people you see who are elevated almost to semi-god status are those entertainers and athletes. And to the extent that they're held accountable to a greater level, that anytime they fall, it becomes a microcosm of everything bad about black people. Let me give you an example. All you have to do is look at someone like Darryl Strawberry, or someone like Mike Tyson. Athletes who have been raised to such a high level in status in society because of their athletic ability. And all of a sudden, when they fall, when they stumble, when they fall short, their sin, their crimes become a part of all of African American people. In other words, someone actually had the nerve to ask me, do all black people bite folks on the ear when they get mad? The spirit of the nigger causes us to embrace all those things that are stereotyped about us. In other words, when you call yourself a nigger, you're embracing the fact that all you can do is play basketball and sing and dance. When you call yourself a nigger, what you're saying is all that you can do is be lazy and shiftless. All you can do is hustle. All you can do is slang and bang and all you can do are all the things that people have attributed to us in terms of stereotypes. And you embrace that, but you embrace it on the inside. It becomes something that's almost unconscious to you. It's why I've been on a pilgrimage for a number of years to destroy that word. Because that word describes nothing good about black people. When we talk about the spirit of the nigger, we talk about the reality that somehow we have forgotten. Somehow we are not remembering who and whose we are. Somehow we have been transformed into something that describes us as less than human. And so when we treat each other as less than human, and when we treat others less than human, it becomes a symptom of that sin sickness in our soul. Let me say this, and I want you to understand this truly. If your history you don't know, then your future you can't control. Let me say that again. In fact, say it after me. If your history you do not know, say it.
Your history you do not know.
Then your future you can't control.
In your future you can't control.
So what happens to you in the future is indicative of how much you know of who you are and where you've been. That means when things happen to you, you can't say racism. You can't say the white man. Because the important thing, or the important element in that, is you've already given control to determine your own destiny to someone else. You haven't understood who you are with a strong enough foundation to make that determination for yourself. And to say, I'm going to be a doctor anyway. I'm going to be a lawyer anyway. I'm going to bust this A on this test anyway. Because if you know who you are in the history of humanity, you recognize that you come from a legacy of people who are always getting A's, who are always busting the math and the science. The whole foundation of mathematics and science comes out of African people. And if you don't know that and you're not connected to that, then you'll get into this thing we call the spirit of the nigger, to think that busting an A on a test is acting white. You'll be a victim of the spirit of the nigger that'll tell you that acting a fool or cutting a fool is being cool. You'll be in a position that I deal with this all the time with some of my professional peers. When you're old enough to buy a home and you're renting a duplex in the hood, and people say, you know, I'm just trying to keep it real. But then if you own a house in the suburbs, you're selling out. This thing that infects our soul, the spirit of the nigger, has us trained and programmed to accept the least in society, to do the least for ourselves, and that when we get into struggle, blame it on something else. And I'm not saying racism and white supremacy ain't real, because it's real, it's very real, it's powerful. But you have a power already invested in you that's been given by people you don't know, who've laid down their life to give you opportunities that you take advantage of every day without being conscious of it, to the extent that you overlook all of that and fall into this spirit and exist within this spirit. And I'm convinced that until you recognize that, until you begin to try to address that, until you do that personally, you will always fall victim to this spirit. This thing will change the way you think. This spirit affects what you do and how you respond to problems that come at you. And if you don't know, now you know that the spirit of the nigger is the very thing that keeps you from being what you are supposed to be. And you can't do anything about it until you first of all recognize that it infects you. That it's an infestation in your soul. How do we want to deal with this? Well, if you understand the effects of slavery and racism in the Americas, if you understand the realities of colonialism on the continent, and you studied those things, and you've opened up some books, and you've gone to the library, and you've done research. Let me say this, because I know this is real. Those of you who've been at this conference yesterday, who've been at this conference before, who will experience the speakers who will speak over the next 2 days, you're going to look at those people and say, man, how do they know so much? How come they dropping so much knowledge? How come I'm learning so much? Hopefully you will be motivated to go and learn for yourself, so that not only you can tell someone else, but each one of you should have the desire that I had when I was a high school student 21 years ago, and came to this conference and was inspired to learn. Hopefully every one of you can do the same thing that I did as a college student, where I studied some things about Marcus Garvey, about Kwame Nkrumah, and I presented a paper at this conference as a college student. Hopefully every one of you will be inspired to learn something about African people, that you want to, that someday you'll have the opportunity to stand up here and speak before a crowd of students. In fact, don't even stop there, before an audience of scholars and professors and people with doctoral degrees, and tell them things they don't know about themselves. You should be encouraged to do that. You're inhibited from doing that by the spirit of the nigger. The spirit of the nigger keeps you from studying. It keeps you from disciplining yourself to turn off the TV, turn off the CD player, turn off the noise, and study and put something in your mind that will stick, that will mean something to someone else, that will be transforming to your own life and be enlightening, encouraging, motivating, and inspiring to someone else's life. You have to want to have this desire to overcome that thing that has kept you down. First of all, that you recognize it. So the Spirit keeps us from remembering who we are. It makes us forgetful of how we got to where we got to. Everyone is in this room because of someone else. Everyone is in this room because of at least two someone else's. Everyone is in this room because there were a whole bunch of folks who've been doing things for you, and some of those you're not even aware of. And then there are people, and then every one of us are aware of things that people have done for us that allowed us just to be here today. So you recognize you're not in this by yourself. Here's a formula, and I draw it from that scripture out of 2 Timothy 3:16. It said that all scripture is given by inspiration of God, and it's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. Gives us 4 principles. And if you have these 4 principles, you can do anything you want to do. You can become anything you want to be. The first principle that comes out of the premise of doctrine is the principle of critical thinking. Being able to think critically is the first step in overcoming the spirit of the nigger. Being able to think critically about a situation. We shared in a group yesterday. Learning how to read and then learning how to read is the imperative understanding of knowledge. That is, learn how to read. The greatest skill that we don't have as an African American people in this society is the ability to read. Our ability to read is lowest among all groups of people in this country. We score the lowest reading scores on the SAT and the ACT. And it's one of the reasons why African American students struggle so much in college. Because you got information coming at you at warp speed. And our ability to read and comprehend at a faster pace that's called for at the college level hasn't been nurtured. But we can run fast and dunk a basketball and shoot a three-pointer. And the only reason we can do that is because we spend lots of time doing that. If you took some of that time and spent it reading, you'll be in a position where you're able to understand things and to do it at a faster level. And you're going to have to do that at the college level, those of you who are high school students here. You're going to have to learn how to read. And in fact, I would suggest 2 things. And I did this is, believe it or not, I recognize this is why my vocabulary and my reading ability was so good. I did 2 things when I was a kid. I read comic books like mad. I mean, I was a mad comic book reader. You know, Spider-Man, you know, Fantastic Four. Some of y'all ain't into that. Iron Man, Silver Surfer. Yeah. See? And I remember reading words that I didn't understand. There was a word, in fact, I kept pronouncing it for years, punny. And then all of a sudden, it dawned on me, P-U-N-Y, puny. For years I read it wrong, punny. That punny man can't do nothing to me. Yeah, 2-3 years I was reading this word wrong, and I kept reading it. And then all of a sudden it caught up with me. Like I used to do that with another word. Likelihood. And I used to read that for years. Likelihood. And I know people who knew what they were talking about, knew how to read, knew what the word is, were laughing at me, giggling on the inside. Every time I said likelihood. Learn how to read. The other thing that helped me to learn how to read, believe it or not, was crossword puzzles. Best way to build your vocabulary. And I'm not talking about TV guy. I'm talking about something out of the New York Times. Or any book that you can buy for $1.25 in any bookstore, any convenience store. Just an everyday tool to build up your vocabulary, to be able to identify with words that cross-reference one another, that are synonymous with one another, so that your vocabulary is extended to the point that everything that comes out of your mouth isn't a profanity. It's important to recognize that the reason that we do things is because we don't know. If you knew how to use a variety of words in a vocabulary, you wouldn't have to use profanity to express how you feel. You can get your point across very succinctly to people who clearly understand what you're talking about. When you understand the words that you can use can be manifested in so many different ways. Even when you add other languages to that, you can cuss somebody out without using a profanity or even the English language. You're going to be encouraged to do that. And that increases your ability to think critically, so that when you read, you understand what you're reading. When you read, you understand who's writing this. When you're hearing me speak, know something about me so you can recognize where I'm coming from, so that you can know how to receive it for yourself. Thinking critically. Thinking critically is the first step in overcoming the spirit of the negative. Second is what you would call problem solving. And it's connected to critical thinking. That is your ability to recognize that there's something wrong. And to also have the determination that there's a solution to this problem. See, because if you go into a situation where there's a problem, and from Jump Street say there's no hope, there's no way we can figure this out, we can't work this out. We do it every day in relationships. People go their separate ways. I'm not just talking about boyfriends and girlfriends. I'm talking about people who've been friends, males and females who've been friends, who go their separate ways because they already determined that there's no way to solve this problem. Problems are a part of life. But your ability to be determined to know that you can solve the problem is the first step in getting it solved. Never look at something as a problem and not know that there's a solution. Because even if you don't know what the solution is, you can be determined to find the solution if you know that a solution has to exist. Problem solving is the second aspect of overcoming the spirit of the negative. The third thing, and I still draw this from right out of that scriptural context, is conflict resolution. And we have a tendency to exacerbate a conflict. And we have developed in our culture things that exacerbate a conflict. Because in fact, I think we have taught Western society how to have an attitude. We have looks and gestures, that thing, that exacerbate a conflict. Like problem solving, we have to determine that there is an outcome, there's a resolution to this conflict. Like problems that come, there will be conflicts in life. Problems are based on situations. Conflicts are based on people. The The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. The principality and power we're talking about this morning is the spirit of the nigger. And the spirit of the nigger causes us to get personal with conflicts between us and another person, when it's really that spirit that has gotten between us and is perpetuating conflict among us. If you've determined that conflict can be resolved because you know that there's a solution to the problem, and your ability to think critically is our ability to address the problem, solve the problem, and resolve the conflict, you are already in a place where you've begun to overcome the spirit of the nigger. Fourth thing, and the final thing, the ability to think critically, the ability to solve problems, the ability to resolve conflicts. The fourth thing is imperative, because once you've cleaned up the house, you have to put something in the house to keep it clean. My daddy used to tell me the reason you have a mess in your room is because you don't pick up after yourself. The reason that the dishes aren't done is because, and there's dishes all in the sink and on the counter, is because you didn't wash your plate out and put it in the dishwasher. Because if you did that, the kitchen would be clean, the countertop would be clean, and the dishes would be ready to be washed at the end of the day. And in learning that, it made me realize what discipline was all about. Discipline helps you keep your house clean once you clean it up. So that once you have used this critical thinking ability to solve the problems and resolve the conflicts that have cleaned up the mess in your spirit, now you can have the ability to keep it clean. And that's what discipline is all about. And you can talk about things on a practical level when it comes to discipline. Why would you stay up all night? In fact, let me use the conference as an example. Because in my years of being at this conference, I've seen many students stay up all night on Thursday and Friday, struggling to get up in the morning sessions. When you got speakers and presenters and panel discussions that have information that you need to change your life, but you've been up to 3 and 4 and 5 in the morning, and now you're dragging just to get over here at 9 and 9:30 and 10 o'clock. That's been a part of this conference since I can remember. Am I right, Chris? We have, and discipline says, I'm here to absorb this stuff. My brother Charles said this morning, he said, I felt like a sponge. How many of you felt like so much information is coming at you and you're just absorbing it all? Sometimes it even seems overwhelming. That's good. Because then what you can do is take these 4 tools that we're talking about to overcome the spirit of the nigger and to begin to apply them. Because what discipline will do is it will, now that your house is clean, now that your soul is clean, it'll keep it clean and allow it to grow in a proper manner. Here's the outcome. The spirit of the nigger has caused black people to lose their mind. The spirit of the nigger has caused us to lose touch with who we are. So when we celebrate Black History Month, we say nothing about Africa. No other group of people on the planet has a history that short. St. Patrick's Day is 2,000 years old. And there's black folks that paint themselves green coming up in 3 weeks to go out and march in the street and drink beer and have a good time. To be a part of the Irish, the luck of the Irish. And during February, there's this tendency to think that black history began 300 and some years ago. When black history began, as speakers have said all yesterday, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago. And it's written, documented history. In fact, what Spike said, it tickles me because I've said this for years. The best book of black history is the Bible. It's the most widely published book of black history that you'll ever see. And most of us aren't familiar with it. And I'm talking about church folks. I'm not talking about folks that go to church. It's important because when we don't take time to remember who we are, whose we are, where God has brought us from. Let me say this before I close. God has allowed African people to go through what we've gone through for the past 500 years for a purpose. For a specific purpose. Ultimately, God will get glory. But in the process, God has raised up, through the experience of African people, a message to the world. That no matter what happens to you, no matter how often you get beat down, no matter how many people talk about you and your mama and your grandma, no matter how many people shut the door, no matter how many people call you out your name, no matter how many times your family is threatened with violence, no matter what happens to you in this life, you can overcome it. You can be victorious in it. You don't have to succumb to the spirit of the nigger, because you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind through the process of discipling yourself after you've been cleansed by critical thought, problem solving, and conflict resolution. Please take advantage of all the information that you get in this conference. All the speakers, all the panel discussions. This afternoon, there's going to be a council of elders. These are elders from our community, people who've been in the struggle, people who've been doing this for years, people who know things that you may never know in your life, but they're here to give you that information, to share with you that knowledge, so that you can take these tools to overcome the spirit of the nigger and become who God has made you to be. And once you get to that point, you will be in a position where you can be of good and value and positivity to someone else. Because you can't even be good to yourself until you know who you truly are. And if you've forgotten that, if you haven't remembered that, if when people like myself are telling you things about where we've been and who you really are, and you don't pay attention, you will be the eternal victim of the spirit of the nigger. Let me say this in closing. And I remember this years ago. Spike Moss has been a mentor of mine for years, and when I was a high school student, we used to do this thing called Black Union Futurism Youth Conferences. And Spike gave a presentation, gave a message, stirring, rousing, and he shared a poem. And I remember that poem even as he spoke. It was words that stuck with me, and have stuck with me for over 22 years. And I use the words because your struggle against the spirit of the nigger has to be one that you're willing to fight to the death. Because our fight isn't about white folks. Our fight isn't even specifically against racism or white supremacy. Our fight is against determining who we are so we can have the self-determination to do for ourselves the things that God has given us the ability to do. And we have to be willing. Now watch this, and this is something that I think this generation here may not be as cool with. This is something that you've got to be willing to die for. Martin Luther King said, a man who has no cause to die for has no purpose to live. Or no purpose to live is being without a cause to die for. And when people say nigger, you need to be ready to challenge it. When people say black, you need to be ready to understand it. Because black refers to our culture. And it refers to the connectiveness that we have to the blackness of African people. And there's nothing negative about it. And black is a premise of power. When you say I'm black, back in the 60s, that was a statement of power. That was a statement that I control my life. That was a statement that I determine who I am. I'm not going to let you call me out my name no matter who you are. And the poem went like this: black power is this to me, Freedom and equality. Frederick Douglass set me free. That's the way I love to be. Oh God, can't you see this white man won't let me be? But if I have to fight and die, then let me die by my brother's side. But if I can't live and be free, then let my blood run red to see. Black power.
It's early in the morning, but y'all should be better than that. I want to hear it. You've been handed an evaluation form. Please fill that out and leave them. Where are we going to be standing up there or?
Yeah, I'll be up there.
Okay, in the back. It's time to go to the concurrent sessions. Please make sure that you pick one that may be of interest to you. And if you go listen, we have so much to offer. There's so many different types of programs and information that people are coming to share with you. Also, please remember, in 284, there are not a lot of signs and stuff out there, but in 284, up on the second floor, and it's in the new wing, there are also vendors for jobs that have jobs and internships and all sorts of stuff like that. So if you're in the market for a summer internship, you're in the market for a job, you just want to check some things out, there are some fantastic opportunities there. So please make sure that you check that out. Also, for those of you, this is something that I always tell everybody, this conference is a leadership conference. You never know who you're going to meet later on that you met today or yesterday or tomorrow. If there is a speaker that you are particularly intrigued with, and maybe even one that you may not be intrigued with, you need to ask for their cards. It's time for you to learn that you need to have business cards. Okay? You never know when you may need to pull from. So, that's just that's my teacher in me. But make sure that you ask folks for their business cards. With that, we're going to go on to the next.
Having access as far as not having insurance, not having transportation, not having medical care readily available to us. And there's several issues that impact on the fact that our death rates tend to be much higher than the whites and other minorities. And one of the reasons for that is our lack of access and some of our lifestyle choices that we make that make us not as healthy as other communities. So first I'd like to introduce the members of our panel. Dr. Anthony Joseph. Dr. Joseph is a professor of occupational health at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And he's going to talk to us about putting the right people in healthcare professions, which is very important to us in our culture. Ms. Eve Nichols, the Director of Disability Services at Emerald Hills Community College. And she'll talk to us about students with disabilities and how they can be addressed in this special population and their healthcare needs. Dr. Carolyn Berg, she's from Nigeria. She's been in the United States for 10 years, and she's a practicing family physician at the Mankato Clinic. She's been there for 5.5 years. And she is also very concerned about the health status of the Pan-Afrikan community. So I'll turn it over first to Dr. Joseph.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I'm interested. What is that? So. what I want to talk to you, share with you some facts and figures. Okay? I want to get away from the emotional side of things and present to you facts about the need to put the right people in the right places. When I'm talking about the health profession, I'm talking about a number of different disciplines. I'm talking about safety profession, ergonomics, nursing, dietitian, health education, health research, occupational medicine, environmental protection, and those are just a few of the many. Now, what has happened over the years? There are 5 points I want to bring to you. I want to share with you 5 points. The first one is the disproportionate number of Pan-African professionals in the health. The second one I want to talk about is the changing demographic in the workplace. The third one is the changing delivery of healthcare, what we see happening around us. And the third one about the historical performance of Pan-African in their environment itself. And the third, our cultural behavior. So I'll just talk about these points briefly, since I have 5 minutes or half a minute per point. Come on. Let's copy that again. If you look at something, in the healthcare business, 7% of the health professionals are Pan-Africans. Only 7%. What do we see? Less than 3% of the graduating people in the health business, in the health disciplines, are Pan-Africans who graduate from school. The third is that there are no black accredited schools in the United States. Out of the 117 historically black universities and colleges, there's no black historical institute in the United States. Let's see what happened in terms of changing workforce demographics. What we are seeing here is an aging population. We see in the workforce today, most of the people are 55 years and over. We are seeing also, in terms of gender, 48% of the workforce are now women. And what again you're seeing? 11.7% of the workforce are now African American, with the Hispanics moving up to 12.5% and the Asian moving to 5.9%. Again, you can see what is happening here. In terms of healthcare, we are seeing a move from the old system into health maintenance organization, better known as HMO. We are seeing preferred provider organization taking place also. And we are also seeing point of source plants taking place. Again, these have great impact on the African society. Now, historically, what do we see? Historically, what do we see? In 1996, Harvard University conducted a survey, and what it discovered was 67% of the black people, the black physicians who graduated, worked in the area where they grew up. And 76% indicated they preferred to work in what we call a distressed area. Okay. Again, we're talking about areas where people do not have insurance or they rely on the state insurance. Okay, Medicare, that kind of thing. Again, what do we see as some of our problems that face us? We are faced with a big one, our eating behavior. If you look, you see the African race has the highest percentage of obesity. Again, we have the highest rate of smoking. Right. Okay. So again, these are things that we see with our cultural behavior. So what that is telling us? It's telling us we need to understand and care for our own. That's the implication here. That the proportion, a very small proportion of us get into the health profession. We need people in the healthcare to help us reduce our HIV rates, obesity, syphilis. We have the highest rate of all these different things. Again, as Marilyn mentioned, we need people to help us to increase our life expectancy. Okay, the black American male is expected to live 6 years less than his counterpart, the white American male. Again, we see we need to get away from being stereotyped and being abused. Again, it says we need to build bridges in terms of cultural and historical barriers that exist. For example, we got to move away from where we've been stereotyped and linked to certain things. Quote 45, the advertisement. It says, what does it use? Africans to show sexual pleasures, sexual success. Again, cognac. If you look at cognac, it gives you an illusion. Who again have been used? African Americans. So what basically it's telling us is we need action, not just to feel good or talk or feel emotional about things. We need to close the gap. We need to rally as leaders. We need to pursue education and training. We need to recruit and retain, because we have the highest dropout rates at school. So we need to promote students to build self-esteem also. To talk to many African Americans to tell you about, oh, I can't do maths, I can't do science, I can't do that. Again, we need to build that. In short, what we need to do is to put the right people in the right place. In closing, the bottom line is we need health professionals in many different spheres of life. And to get there, we can only get there by training. Education and training is the key. And again, the key is education and training. And a very, very important point. You can talk all day, you can talk all night. You can come to all these conferences and talk about what's happening. But if we fail to prepare, we got to prepare ourselves to fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph. Now I'd like to hear from Dr. Berg from Mankato State.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure indeed to be here. We don't have much time, but I just want to add to my introduction, I think the most important qualification that I have is the fact that I'm a mother of two lovely boys, which is far above any credentials that I have. I just want to address the health status of minorities, Pan-African community as a whole, and I agree with Dr. Joseph here. Look at facts. Facts will stimulate us to move forward, not to discourage us or to stereotype us, but more so to give us the opportunity to use these facts to change statistics in the next 10 to 20 years. If we look at infant mortality rate, infant death rate among African Americans and minorities generally is much higher above the national averages. For example, infant mortality rates are 2 times higher for African Americans and 1.5 times higher for American Indians than whites. With cancer, African American men under the age of 65 are more likely to have prostate cancer, twice as high compared to the whites, and they are more likely to die from cancer by about 50% compared to the male counterparts, the white. With heart disease, if we adjust the death rate, I'm looking at facts from 1995, African Americans we're more likely to have about 147 deaths for 100,000 people compared to 105 deaths per 100,000 people in white people. While the overall death rate in the United States due to coronary artery disease has declined by about 20% from 1987 to 1995, the decrease for African Americans was only about 13%. I quote African Americans here because these are the studies that was done, but I look at it all as blacks, African or African American descent, about the same. And I think it's probably higher now since we've had a lot more immigrants from African countries like Somalia, Kenya, Uganda. We're tending to see more people with heart disease and diseases like diabetes and hypertension being diagnosed at an earlier age than you would for the white counterpart. With HIV and AIDS infections, while the racial and ethnic groups account for only about 25% in the US population, they account for more than 50% of all AIDS cases. The epidemic is decreasing in some population. The number of new AIDS cases among African Americans is now greater than the number of new AIDS cases among whites. For example, although the number of AIDS diagnoses among gay and bisexual men has decreased dramatically among white men since 1989, the number of AIDS diagnoses among gay and bisexual African Americans has increased. In addition, has increased significantly to probably about 75% of AIDS cases and new infections relating to injecting drugs and sexual means of transmission also. With diabetes, which is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States, it is really a very serious public health problem affecting about 16 million Americans with estimated and indirect cost of about $98 billion per year. The prevalence of this disease, however, is highest among African Americans. It's probably about 70% higher than in white people. And the prevalence in Hispanics is probably nearly double that of the whites. The prevalence rate of diabetes among African and African American people is of major concern to me personally. I have a very strong family history of that, and if I don't change my lifestyle, the way I eat, and improve my level of activity, I would definitely be a candidate. But that is true for many people of African descent. Immunization rates for most of the critical childhood vaccines, vaccination levels are nearly the same for preschool children of all racial and ethnic groups, narrowing a gap that was estimated to be as wide as 26% about a generation ago. However, the racial and ethnic minority children still lag far behind the white children, while overall vaccination rates are when they are compared. About 79% of white children have received full series of vaccinations by age 2. Only about 74% of African American children have received full series by the age of 2. With adult immunizations, we also fall way behind. There are some preventable diseases among adults that we can vaccinate, for example, influenza. And majority of African American and black and people of African descent have not received or do not regularly get their flu vaccines. And influenza does account to up to about 45,000 adult deaths a year. Pneumococcal vaccines for people greater than the age of 65 and even younger when they have other comorbidities like severe lung disease and diabetes and heart disease. We're still lagging behind in immunizing our adult population. Is my time up? I'm just trying to look at different diseases that we can begin to screen for more regularly if we have access to healthcare. And that will take me to my next topic. What are the barriers that prevent us African and African American people from achieving the optimum health care that everybody has a right to in this society, in this day and age? There are many barriers, and I'm sure a couple of my able colleagues here are going to probably expatiate on that too. I was looking at some of the lists that I have acquired from the literature that I've looked. Number one, the socio-economic factors, and I will just read it due to lack of time, and we can discuss more about any of the topics that you're interested in during the discussion. Socio-economic factors. Number two, deeply rooted stereotypes that need to be changed. Number three, deadly discrimination, particularly us, the healthcare providers, we stereotype. She's a black female, she's probably likely had multiple sexual partners and probably likely has had chlamydia, gonorrhea and stuff like that. And, probably, we can go on and on and on. Cultural competent care, which is quite lacking, and I would agree with Dr. Joseph here, that we are very lacking in the number of people that should provide culturally competent care. And if you don't have the right people there, who is going to take care of the population at risk? Number five, research biases. Unfortunately, a lot of the researches have been done on typically white male population. Not a lot of research have been done addressing everybody in the population. Language barriers, lack of interpreters, and we're seeing a lot of that problem now because of the recent huge number of African immigrants in the United States. I practice here in Mankato, and we have a lot of Somali people, and it is sometimes very difficult to get the entire history from them. And if you don't have the patience or the competence on how to really get what you want to get in order to help them, then healthcare becomes very much minimal for those people. Anyway, language barriers, as I said, transportation difficulties, structural barriers, location of clinics, embarrassment on the part of the healthcare receiver sometimes because we've been stereotyped. Fear of the unknown, you don't know what you're going to get when you get there. Beliefs and personal attitudes that we have, and also that the healthcare providers have about a certain group of people. Relationship with healthcare providers and previous experiences can impact on accessibility to healthcare. Subjective norms, for example, influence of a significant other can affect the healthcare access. And I see that a lot now that I take care of the Somali population. If the significant other, be it husband, elder, mother, or somebody that is very close to the family, does not agree with the healthcare plan, then the patient per se will not comply with the treatment plan. Okay. I think that is about it that I have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clark. Okay. Now we'd like to hear from Ms. Nichols and her take on the disabilities with African American students.
Basically, when I see individuals with health issues, I basically see them in an educational setting. One of the things that has become apparent to me over the years is that African American students with disabilities are much less likely to receive a proper diagnosis of their disability in K through 12. African American students are 3 times more likely as their white counterparts to be diagnosed as being developmentally disabled. African American students, and many of the barriers that the sister was talking about in terms of health care, these barriers also exist in the public school systems when we're thinking about African American children with disabilities. Most of the time, I think one of the major barriers is not wanting to be labeled. The parents looking at and the child looking at the pros and cons of the labeling process. And you find this a lot, especially with certain types of disabilities, as in learning disabilities, or attention deficit disorders, or attention deficit hyperactive disorders. Parents weigh the pros and cons of having their children labeled as being disabled. However, one of the things that's one of the positive things about having your child diagnosed as having a disability in K through 12 is that hopefully that they will receive an appropriate education, which is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I think that some of the disabilities that you can look at in K through 12 and also in the post-secondary setting is chronic illness. Many of these types of disabilities, students do not really think about them as something that they may need an accommodation for in an educational setting, and they don't really think about the fact that they may need the accommodation, and in fact they can obtain an accommodation that may help them perform up to their potential in college. Sometimes I believe that individuals do not look at health issues, which turn into disabilities. They're all very interconnected, as really having a real impact on you in your daily life activities. And one of your daily life activities is education. Sitting in a classroom, being able to take information in, and also being and process that information, and then being able to demonstrate that you've mastered this information and give it back. Some of these disabilities are asthma. Lots of the medication that students take for asthma will result as a side effect. They will have processing deficits. That means that they will think a little bit slower and they'll be able to process information a little bit slower. There are accommodations that help to lessen the impact that will have on a student in an educational environment. The other one is diabetes. Students with diabetes may need several different types of accommodations. High blood pressure. We don't tend to think of young people as having high blood pressure, but they do. Okay? Young people can have strokes. I've worked with students who had strokes as young as the age 2. High blood pressure, along with high blood pressure, will come the medication issues, the side effects. And also we have the issue of AIDS. Individuals tend to be living longer with AIDS because of all of the medical advancements. These students are entitled to accommodations in school also. And then we're seeing an increase in students that are choosing to come to school of the older population after they've had issues with substance abuse. Students are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the 1973 Rehabilitation Act if they're substance abusers and they are in recovery. There may be certain accommodations that students will need as they are in recovery because alcohol and drugs will do damage to your brain. So therefore, you may need some accommodations to make up for those deficits that are a result of the abuse. We're also seeing an increase in students with mental illness. Mental illness brings with it its own types of functional limitations that may need to be accommodated. In addition, there's always the added effect of the medication that most students with psychological disabilities are taking. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on the students who have attention deficit disorders. Most students who have attention deficit disorders also take medication. And there are issues in terms of that medication when they come to college and when they're in an educational setting. So, all in all, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that students, especially African American students, are so reluctant to say, I have a disability, I need an accommodation, I may need a note taker in my class, I may need some extended testing time, I have a learning disability, my learning disability impacts my ability to read, I may need to take textbook. They're so reluctant to do this. And in the end, most students who use accommodations in college are able to perform up to their potential because of those accommodations. So in closing, I just wanted to say, if you have a disability, if you know somebody in your family that has a disability and wants to go to college or are in K through 12, you should get involved and ask questions about who is providing the services to those particular students, what services are they entitled to, and make sure that they take full advantage of those services, not only in the educational setting, but also there are many outside agencies as the PACER agency, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, that will provide financial assistance to individuals with disabilities who want to attend college. And all of the things that I named, the substance abuse, chronic illness, mental illness, cancer, ADD, LD, all of those fall within that category of disabilities.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nichols. I guess I can wrap this all up. All of my colleagues have stated that basically the American healthcare system is dysfunctional as far as African Americans are concerned, both on our access, the type of medical care that we receive, and when we add our disabilities to it, then we really exacerbate that problem. We have inadequate diagnosis and treatment for several reasons. And as Dr. Joseph said, we need to take these facts and use these facts to empower us to make changes in our lives, to make changes in our communities. First of all, by taking care of ourselves at home, introducing a healthy lifestyle, introducing healthy meals and activity, limiting or smoking or stop smoking. In fact, studies have shown that just cutting back on smoking does not help. You have to actually quit smoking. And we also find that the younger that children have, see the good eating habits and exercise and practicing lifestyle choices in the home, then they are more likely to carry on those good, positive lifestyle choices into adulthood the younger that is introduced. And then we need to look at going into healthcare professions ourselves. And you as students, there are so many ways that you can go into healthcare and make a difference in the community, whether it's physicians or nurses or physician assistant, nurse practitioners, podiatrists, especially with the amount of diabetes that we have in the community. You know, myself, I'm an administrator, so I don't actually lay hands on any patients, but I certainly try to make concessions in my community to bring health care to us. So with that being said, are there any questions that you have for any of the panelists? Yes.
Two questions. One has to do with the perception of overdiagnosis of ADD, ADHD some of it has to do with also the premise that at some point in time, I think children have always been children, but then at some point in time, this diagnosis came into the institutionalization, and it's my feeling that though ADD, ADHD are real health concerns, that there's an overdiagnosis of that in the African American community. And the second question, and I think this is for Dr. Joseph, is what can we do in the States here to address the issue of AIDS in the diaspora, and more specifically on the continent?
So you have a twofold question. Okay, can you move out that microphone? I think that you're right. I think that there may be an overdiagnosis of ADD and ADHD in all communities. I think, though, that just some typically cultural things may lead African American students to be more readily diagnosed as ADD. I think that that's where the role of parents come in determining what kind of treatment. However, I do not think that our students being diagnosed as ADD is really the most prevalent problem. I think that our students with average to above average intelligence who are being labeled as developmentally disabled is much more of a problem in the schools than the overdiagnosis of ADD. I do think that, however, though, I do think that that is a problem not just in our community, but in America, period. Because if you just look at my profession, 15 years ago, I did not work with one student who had ADD. Okay? Now, 1/4 of the population that I work with have been diagnosed as having ADD. And I think that what concerns me most about that type of diagnosis is the medication that's involved. If the student is diagnosed ADD, okay, then we're going to put them on medication. What are the long-lasting effects of these medications? We still don't know. They're just now looking at the long-lasting effects of Ritalin that they started giving to young children, 20 years ago. Those kids are now coming to adulthood, and they're really having some serious side effects. So that would be my concern with the overdiagnosis of an ADD, would be the medication issue. And yeah, and I do agree with you that it is going on. And in addition to that, our students being labeled or being diagnosed as being developmentally disabled, that's going on also. African American children are 3 times as likely as their white counterparts to be labeled as being developmentally disabled in the school system. And that's a real concern.
You also had a question as far as AIDS?
Yeah, what can we do here in the States and to address AIDS in the diaspora, particularly because of how devastating it's been in African populations on the continent?
If I can just, there are a lot of activities, there's a lot of money that's being put towards the entire problem of HIV and AIDS in our community. There's federal money available, there's state money available, but my personal opinion is that education is the key. Education on what causes AIDS, how you get it, how you spread it, and making sure that those that are at highest risk, we try to eliminate that risk or educate them what they can do. One of the things that my own agency does is we go out into substance abuse communities, commercial sex communities, and we hand out condoms, we hand out bleach kits. We cannot advocate that we can change their lifestyle. We can't tell them you can't take drugs or you cannot participate in sex, but we can at least lead them to a change that will hopefully decrease the spread of AIDS in our community. We also have a misunderstanding of how you get it. People still think that that's not so. I think Dr. Berg will agree with me that although there are lots of drugs available, and people that do become HIV positive will not necessarily develop full-blown AIDS when they're living longer. African Americans, for the most part, do not have access to those drug cocktails. The state and federal programs that supply money for those drugs rarely offer us the top-of-the-line medications. We'll get the second medication instead of what's available to those that have insurance. And also some insurance companies do not pay for some of the experimental drugs. So there's so many avenues that whole AIDS issue and HIV transmission need to be addressed. Maybe Dr. Berg can hear.
Okay, yeah, I just want to go a little further with the question about in the whole African, the diaspora as a whole, both African American and Africa. As we know, it is really a burning and fast, is the worst epidemic ever, I think, in the history of mankind. And in Africa, it's on the rise. When I was in medical school in Nigeria, I didn't see a single person with HIV or AIDS. That was back in the mid-80s. And I think in the whole country then the incidence was probably less than 1%. But lately I heard that it's probably even up to about 15% or more. And each time I call home, I hear about so-so and so-so that have died as a result of AIDS. And what is really, and I agree with you, Melanie, is that the key thing is education. If we will educate people about the reality of HIV, how it is transmitted, then I think we'll be able to cut down on the rate of transmission significantly. And I'm really amazed that even in a society like this, that there's media everywhere, still our cultural practices have not changed. Still many young people are having sex without condoms, and still people are injecting with injecting IV drugs and are sharing needles. And I can't overemphasize it. It is education. And where does the education come from? Does it have to be from healthcare providers only? We're very limited. And as we see from the statistics, how many Pan-African people are in the healthcare profession? 7%. 7%, which is extremely concerning. So I think that we need to provide this. We, the 7%, cannot provide the education to the millions in this country. So we need to reach to people like churches, mosques, everywhere that we can possibly educate people. I was talking to my mom on the phone not too long ago in Nigeria, and I had offered to go home and do some teaching on AIDS, and she said, oh, when in our church, even the Women's Fellowship, they are talking to young women about HIV/AIDS, and it's no longer something that they are ashamed of. They're trying not to be ashamed of anymore, but they're trying to say it is a reality and you can die from it. And if you don't trust your husband, maybe you must insist on having sex with condoms, because we're having too many orphans. And again, it's education. I don't know what else I can say. The reason I emphasize on that, the prevention, is because that's our only hope. Once you get the disease, as we say, because of the so many barriers to healthcare access, we are not likely going to have the optimum treatment. So what can we do? Prevent.
I want to emphasize, the